I decided it's fun to read books on camera, so I want to read this other one. It's a little backstory. It's called Words to Live By. This is my great grandma's old book. She lived to be 100, and when she died, I went through her house and took things that I thought was interesting. This was years ago, but now I actually feel like reading it. It says it's got a little tag with her address on it. It says 1980. It's got little pictures. But yeah, I had fun reading the Necronomicon shit. So now I want to try to read another book. Just go for like an hour, because it's about as much as I can do in a row. Alright, we got a little. Gets copyright 1956. The actual book is from 1980. Little quote here. No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. Teachers merely show the way. Nancy Wilson Ross. And then quotations, it says, The Return of Lady Brace. Okay. Index here. Alright, we'll do the introduction. The Words to Live By series in This Week magazine was born in 1947, at a time when Americans were seeking to adjust from wartime conditions back to the uneasy terms of atomic peace. The idea for the series stemmed from the reading of a book by David Grayson, which told stories about rural life in his New England village. One character appealed to me immediately. He was a farmer, and whenever he ran across some bit of verse or prose he liked, he slipped the words inside of his hat band to be tacked up later on his granary wall. I thought afterward, Grayson wrote, how most of us have collections of sayings we live by. I believe it would be difficult to find an adult human being who hasn't a saying or two or more that he is saving because it expresses something vital. Words to Live By was conceived not as essays that would teach people or preach at them, but as a collection of such sayings, combined with the actual experience of the people who chose them. It was to provide, in terms of contemporary America, and for the 13 million families who received This Week, the modern equivalent of David Grayson's Granary Wall. I know I butchered that shit. That's part of the fun. We get through this shit. Because the quotations had caught fire in minds accustomed to important enterprises of thought, I hope they would express something vital to millions of others. From this sharing process, we could all benefit at a time when so many people are seeking to rediscover and reaffirm the basic values of life. That our hopes were justified is attested by many reactions. One of the most gratifying was this comment from Kenneth Roberts, written shortly after publication of the first collection of Words to Live By. I had no expectations whatever, yet here I find a book loaded with character revelations that are unique. The rubbing together of minds has produced a fountain of ideas. Equally rewarding were the many letters from readers indicating the almost magic power of the sharing process. Typical is the following from a reader in St. Clair Shores, Michigan. For some time now, I've wanted to write and thank you for Words to Live By. It is truly that. Each week it seems to have a message just for me. Yet, as I talk to others, they also feel the same. Contributors to the series also experience the same direct and intimate response. Cameron Hawley, for example, wrote me as follows after publication of his little article, which appears on page 189 in this volume. I have been simply bowled over by the amount of reaction there has been to my little Words to Live By piece. Letters have been coming in from all over the country. As you know, I've written for almost every magazine in the country, but I don't think I have ever done a piece that brought more reaction from readers. More than a dozen years have passed since the appearance of the first contribution to Words to Live By. In that time, upwards of 600 men and women have shared their thoughts with the readers of This Week magazine. In 1948, the present publishers asked me to collect some of the more significant pieces in a book. The anthology was revised the following year, but there's been no revision since. This is an entirely new collection, with one or two exceptions noted in the text of the pieces which have appeared on the Words to Live By page since 1950. They are grouped into sections which follow the four human relationships: man with himself, with other people, with the larger world, and finally with God and the infinite. These groups are followed by two sections of more homely philosophy, When I Was a Child and Ways of Life, which contain some truths handed down within families, rules that shape and mold American character. In a final section, the reader is once again encouraged to join in the sharing and record his own words to live by. The continued need for such sharing was proclaimed dramatically in 1958 when the important Rockefeller Report of Education was published. In it are these significant words: what most people want, young or old, is not merely security or comfort or luxury, although they are glad enough to have these. Most of all, they want meaning in their lives. If our era and our culture and our leaders do not or cannot offer great meanings, great objectives, great convictions, then people will settle for shallow and trivial substitutes. This is a deficiency for which we all bear a responsibility. This is the challenge of our times. In effect, Words to Live By series, on which this book is based, represents an effort to meet this challenge in terms of our times and with the many million families who receive This Week magazine each Sunday. Don't forget to buy This Week magazine. It has been an invigorating experience to work with people and see them through the words they live by. It has been inspiring to learn from thousands of reader letters how far spread is the appreciation of the wisdom and challenge these brief pieces contain. The sum of such letters is heartening affirmation that Americans everywhere are ready to respond to great meanings, great objectives, and great convictions. And I am grateful to the many contributors in this series who have helped to provide them. William Nichols, New York City, January 25th, 1959. All right. Part 1, Living with Yourself. Little drinky poo. Fairly easy read so far. Not as many alien words as the Necronomicon, but we'll see how we do. First story is called Start Living by Cornelia Otis Skinner, writer, actress, and monologuist. Here's a quote here from Emerson: "We are always getting ready to live, but never living. That's the truth." By Ralph Waldo Emerson. All right, let's go. My father, Otis Skinner, was a highly successful director as well as an actor. When directing, he had one bit of advice to pass on to the nervous player. "Take the pins out of your diaphragm, my friend," he would say, "and start breathing." This always had the instant effect of loosening the jittery actor's tension of voice and body and easing him into a freer and better performance. Father once gave me similar advice, if under dissimilar circumstances. I was 23 and going through a trying period of introspection and immature gloom. My attitude of, "Oh, the pain of it all," was an acute pain in the neck to my family. Father put up with me for a time. Then one day, we were taking a long walk in the country. He shook me out of my Byronic miasma with an amused but understanding, "Take the pins out of your diaphragm, kid, and start living." I can't say that I started living just then, but his words gave me a sudden new perspective of myself. A sorry sight it was. A youthful egoist, so tensed up in self absorption, she had ceased to breathe deeply of the life around her. Even today, the advice holds good for me. God knows there are days of tension for everyone, but we are all too prone to fight tension with further tensions, senseless distractions, incessant entertainment, the obsession of keeping busy, often with activities of little value. Or we resort to an ostrich head in the sand negation with liquor, easy love affairs, and the latest brand of tranquilizer, anything to avoid an ever deepening awareness of being alive. Life isn't easy, but in the long run, it's easier than going to elaborate ends to deny it. We might do worse than take the pins out of our diaphragms and start living. All right, that was the first one. This next one's called Finding Yourself by Charles Jackson, author of The Lost Weekend and Earthly Creatures. Here's another quote. God, this is fucking weird. Oh, wad some power the gifty gie us to see ourselves as it others sees us. Whatever the fuck that means. Robert Burns. Our teenage daughter came home the other day with one of those amazed, if commonplace, discoveries peculiar to the young. After school, she had gone with some pals to an ice cream joint, the back room of which was lined with mirrors. It was the darndest thing, she said. I saw this girl's profile in the glass, and I stared and stared, wondering who she was, when all of a sudden I realized it was me. All the time it was me, she cried, carried away by her astonishment to the point of throwing to the winds her unusually impeccable grammar. Why, she looked no more like me than anything. I didn't know I looked like that. We've all had a similar experience at one time or another, and I could have told her further raised her eyebrows, that if by some magic she could watch herself walking along the street, she would not recognize or even know who it was. But if it were one of her friends, she could spot the identity and name of the girl after no more than a most casual glance. Why this should be true is one of the most baffling mysteries, but true it is, all the same. Not for nothing did Bobby Burns write his famous couplet, concluding cognantly that such a gift would fray Monet a blunder free us and foolish notion. 20 centuries before that, Plato said it even more simply with his two words, know thyself. Offhand, and that is the delusive part of it, it would seem as easy as pie to know oneself. After all, whom do we spend more time with? With whose most intimate thoughts are we more in constant exchange? But it isn't as easy as that. And the older we grow, the more we realize it. Our real identity, our innermost self, eludes us, leaving us with the frustrated but resigned certainty that if we really knew who we were, the complex business of life would be simpler. Repeatedly, the baffling question comes up. Why did I do this or that today? Why did I lose my temper? Or take that extra drink? Or say hurtful things to someone whose love I sorely want? Why, and why, and why? Nor do the mirrors give us any help. We gaze searchingly into the glass, and all we see there is the reflection of the face we present to the world. The realer self lies somewhere within, unknown, but only too evidently there. For we cannot fool ourselves. It may well be that ultimate self-knowledge will come only with the final moment. Meanwhile, we try harder and more honestly as the years pass. Sometimes we find a clue in some chance remark with an old friend, a bit read in some wise book, a fleeting thought during a moment of deep feeling and deeper meditation. Thus, bit by bit, self-knowledge grows. But it does not come easy, and perhaps this very awareness of the difficulty sustains us, spurs us on toward the ever receding goal. For the self-knowledge we seek, Rising above our social vanities and pride and the impression we wish to make on friends is a full time, lifetime job. All right. Liking Yourself by John Steinbeck, author. There's a quote here. That which we are, by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Once a friend of mine named Ed said to me, "For a very long time I didn't like myself." It was not said in self pity, but simply as an unfortunate fact. It was a very difficult time, he said, and very painful. I did not like myself for a number of reasons, some of them valid and some of them pure fancy. I would hate to have to go back to that. Then gradually, he said, I discovered with surprise and pleasure that a number of people did like me. And I thought, if they can like me, why can't I like myself? Just thinking it did not do it, but slowly I learned to like myself, and then it was all right. This was not said in self-love, and its bad connotation, but in self-knowledge. He meant literally that he had learned to accept and like the person Ed as he liked other people. It gave him a great advantage. Most people do not like themselves at all. They distrust themselves, put on masks and pomposities, like you're being pompous. They quarrel and boast and pretend and are jealous because they do not like themselves. But mostly, they do not even know themselves well enough to form a true liking. And since we automatically fear and dislike strangers, we fear and dislike our stranger selves. I wish we could all be so. If we could learn to like ourselves even a little, maybe our cruelties and angers might melt away. Maybe we would not have to hurt one another just to keep our ego chins above water. Ego chins, that's pretty funny. All right, next one. Do you want to be wise, rich, famous? By Dorothy Van Doren, editor and author. And the quote, God says, take what you want and pay for it. Spanish proverb. When I first heard this proverb from Spain, it frightened me. I used to dream of an angel with a flaming sword. But as I thought more about it, I realized that the angel held not a sword, but a balance. In one side, you put what you would like to be. Do you want to be famous? Very well, the angel then spends every waking hour in the pursuit. Oh, very well, says the angel. Then spend every waking hour in the pursuit of fame. It will show up on the other side of the balance in time spent and sacrifices made. Is it riches you want? Think about money every day, study it, give your life to it, and the balance will be weighted with gold, but at the cost of other things. Maybe you want to be wise. The angel will weigh out a high payment for that too. It will include a good life, pursuit of knowledge, and an uncompromising love of truth. Everything has its price. We are familiar with this idea in our daily lives. We go to the self-service store. In our wire cart, we put a can of tomatoes, a bit of cheese, bread, hamburger, and spaghetti. On the way out, the clerk adds up our bill, puts our purchases in a paper bag, and we carry home our dinner after we have paid for it. So the balance of our lives. On one side, our heart's desire. On the other side of the scales, the reckoning. When the scales are even, you may take out what you have bought. Sometimes the prices seem high, but remember, you must pay for the character and quality of your goal as well as for the achievement of it. The law is simple, and it is just. You may have what you want, but you must pay. Nothing is free. You Are What You Do by Madame Chiang Kai-shek. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Galatians 6:7. In the past, if the past has taught us anything, it is that every cause brings its effect. Every action has a consequence. This thought, in my opinion, is the moral foundation of the universe. It applies equally in this world and the next. We Chinese have a saying, If a man plants melons, he will reap melons. If he sows beans, he will reap beans. And if this is true of every man's life, good begets good, and evil leads to evil. True enough, the sun shines on the saint and the sinner alike, and too often it seems like the wicked wax and prosper. But we can say with certitude that, with the individual as with the nation, the flourishing of the wicked is an illusion, for, unceasingly, life keeps books on us all. In the end, we are all the sum total of our actions. Character cannot be counterfeited, nor can it be put on and cast off as if it were a garment to meet the whim of the moment. Like the markings on wood which are ingrained in the very heart of the tree, character requires time and nurture for growth and development. Thus, also, day by day, we write our own destiny. For, inexorably, we become what we do. This, I believe, is the supreme logic and the law of life. Alrighty. The Uncommon Man by Herbert Hoover, former President of the United States. That nation is proudest and noblest and most exalted, which has the greatest number of really great men. Sinclair Lewis. In my opinion, we are in danger of developing a cult of the common man, which means a cult of mediocrity. But there is at least one hopeful sign. I've never been able to find out just who is this common man. In fact, most Americans, especially women, will get mad and fight if you try calling them common. This is hopeful because it shows that most people are holding fast to an essential fact in American life. We believe in equal opportunity for all, but we know that this includes the opportunity to rise to leadership. In other words, to be uncommon. Let us remember that the great human advances have not been brought about by mediocre men and women. They were brought about by distinctly uncommon people with vital sparks of leadership. Many great leaders were of humble origin, but that alone was not their greatness. It is a curious fact that when you get sick and you want an uncommon doctor, if your car breaks down, you want an uncommonly good mechanic. And when we get into war, we want dreadfully an uncommon admirable and an uncommon general. I have never met a father and mother who did not want their children to grow up to be uncommon men and women. May it always be so, for the future of America rests not in mediocrity, but in the constant renewal of leadership in every phase of our national life. And it has this editor's note. There's a fucking bug on the page. Editor's note. The article above first appeared on the Words to Live By page and This Week on February 6, 1949. It has since been widely reprinted. We reprint it now and again, as an eloquent reminder of America's greatest need, the pursuit of excellence. The Larger Aim by Nathan M. Pusey, president of Harvard University. It is essential that we enable young people to see themselves as participants in one of the most exciting eras in history and to have a sense of purpose in relation to it. Rockefeller Report on Education. This sounded like something. Not long ago, I was disturbed to read a newspaper report of a student's speech which maintained that today's college senior views his education simply as a means toward a better paying job, more security, and social position. There are students who seriously believe this. If there are students who seriously believe this, then it seems to me that they've missed the main point of college, or indeed of being alive, that we are in for trouble. The true liberal education has larger aims than just the cramming its students with facts in order to teach them how to earn a living. First, it must help each student to find himself as an individual. Then, it must help him to lose himself in interests, causes, and ideas larger and more enduring than he is. America has no need for a race of young people fitted to the same pattern, content to sit back and enjoy what has been called a prosperous conformity. But our country will always have room for imaginative, reasonable, and responsible men and women. and it desperately needs the informed and the truly creative among its young people. I believe the teacher's mission is to help every young person in his care grow into the broadest, deepest, most vital person possible. And in fulfilling himself, the student will, I am convinced, arrive at moments of heightened insight when he sees more clearly than ever before what the world is about and how he can fit into it creatively and significantly. Viewed this way, a college education suddenly takes on new meaning, and so do the staggering estimates of college enrollment. Instead of a frightening prospect of millions of young people solely concerned with a scramble for better jobs, we can look forward confidently to a challenging tomorrow when millions of young Americans turn to college because they want to realize their full capacity as human beings, to find major pleasure in learning, to live richly and responsibly, and to do their part to help create a better world. How I Found Peace by H.V. Kaltenborn, veteran news analyst. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night, the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. William Shakespeare. For more than 50 years, reporter, editor, and radio commentator, I've tried to live up to this bit of good counsel, with which Polonius set Literis on his way. Every man sets himself in a certain standard. The hard thing is to live up to it. In my line of work, that of analyzing and interpreting the news of the day for millions of readers and listeners, the temptation to serve something other than the public interest is constant. The human instinct to protect friends, the natural desire to escape criticism, the direct or indirect pressure from business and editorial associates, the more or less legitimate demands of an advertising sponsor are always raising ethical issues. Without some guiding principle, it is not easy to know what to do. The simplest way out is to yield to pressure, but that undermines character and makes it more difficult to resist than the next demand. As a boy, I studied the lives of our great American editors, and I learned they became great because they had the courage and independence to be true to themselves. They became my ambition to make the public cause my cause and to serve it regardless of cost or consequence. I have not always been right, alas, but I've been true to myself even when I was wrong, and for half a century I've had peace of mind. The Greatest Art by Miles Connolly, author of The Bump on Brannigan's Head, and a quote by Henry Thoreau. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture or to carve a statue, and so to make a few objects beautiful. But it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look, to affect the quality of the day. That is the highest of arts. In these words, Thoreau is trying to remind us that great art is not restricted exclusively to such pursuits as painting, music, sculpture, and writing. There is an art of living too. One can find an artist's works inspiring, while at the same time his life is common, petty, or even sordid. In contrast, Thoreau makes us think of such people as St. Francis of Assisi, Gandhi, Florence Nightingale. Not artists in the usual sense, but persons who, through the nobility of their lives, affected the quality of the day. There is no limit to the number of such artists. It includes the countless obscure, good people who quietly affect the lives of those about them without even being aware they're doing it, winning no commendation and expecting none. Everybody must, at one time or another, have known such persons, strangers as well as relatives or friends, who have changed the quality of the day for him. They come into a room in a dark hour, a sick room, say, or a death room, a room without hope, or merely in an hour when we are lonely or discouraged. They may say little, if anything, but the shining quality of goodness radiates from them, from their mere presence. And where there was dark, there is now light, or the beginning of light. Where there was cowardice, there is courage. Where there was listlessness, there is love of life. These friends and relatives are wonderful strangers met at a picnic, in a lifeboat, a hospital waiting room. All these humble and unaware carry with them the kindness and generosity of their lives. These, it seems to me, are the greatest artists, for they practice the highest of the arts, the art of life itself. Oh shit. Alright. Now we get the second set of stories. It's called The Happy Road. Where Happiness Begins. By Donald Kohlroas Piety. The quote here: "There is no duty we underrate so much as the duty of being happy." Robert Louis Stevenson. Now there's a bit of morality as manly as it is smiling. I never did become convinced of what I was so smugly told in childhood: be good and you will be happy. Whereas I am quite sure that if you are happy, you will be good. People who generate this inner sunshine make life please, pleasanter. Pleasanter. Cut the fucking word off, fuck me up. People who generate this inner sunshine make life pleasanter for those around them. Their impulses lead to right action. Their thoughts are usually true. They have roots in some deep, shining faith. Now anyone can be good. Now anyone can be in good spirits when the luck is running his way, but happiness is not always the result of fortune. Frequently, it's a virtue, and a brave one. Happiness comes of the grace to accept life gratefully and make the most of and make the most of the best of it. It isn't always easy, or RLS. Oh, Robert Louis Stevenson would not elsewhere have spoken of his great task of happiness. Very naturally, we all resent those tiresome Pollyannas who foist their cheerfulness upon us regardless of our fate and feelings. Only the whiners and grumblers are harder to bear with, and those spoiled children of privilege who waste the joys they have by not knowing they have them. But look around you at some others. Every day I meet them, men and women who I know to have such trials or disappointments or poverty of opportunity that I marvel at their faces. They're not only brave, they're getting some joy out of life. Such people, I think, improve the climate of our world. They put heart in others to shoulder gallantly the great duty of happiness. So, lifting one another's spirit, we can get through even our times of trouble. We will not miss the chances of pleasure in a sunset or the face of a friend at the front door. And to those faithful in this daily duty of happiness, may a rewarding providence vouchsafe many an unexpected moments of real delight. An unexpected moment of real delight. Butchered that one. Let's keep going though. This is fun. Blessed Boomerang by Maurice Chevalier, comedian. The days that make us happy make us wise. John Masefield. People are all the time asking me one question: how do you always manage to be so cheerful? Of course, I do not always feel gay. If I did, it would be what you call slap happy. But immediately, when I sense an audience responding to the gaiety I'm trying to give out, I feel gaiety coming back to me. It's like a boomerang, a blessed boomerang. This works not only for the performer, it is a good game anybody can play. A man goes into his office. He's grumpy, growls a greeting to his secretary. She may have awakened, sprinted, and jaunty. But right away, the ugliness is contagious. Or, in reverse, he comes in whistling. Maybe he's picked a flower from his garden for his buttonhole as he hurried to catch his train. He extends a merry greeting. It boomerangs. The office brightens. There are targets everywhere. Just take aim and let go with good cheer. I like to try it out on bus drivers in big cities. They are worried a lot. People ask them long and involved questions, usually about how to get someplace in the opposite direction. So board a bus, give a greeting. One time it did not work. I was not in a good mood. My approach, or rather my aim, was poor. The driver snarled. Whether in pain or indifference, I do not know. Then I transferred to another bus. This time I threw out the greeting with urgency and determination. My greeting was returned, wrapped in a pleasant smile. I got off that bus, revived. The business of getting back something for what you give appeals to my practical French nature, especially when the something benefits you so much. It is what they call in business a high rate of return. So, happy hunting, or perhaps I should say, happy boomeranging. Editor's note: for the story of King Vidor's discovery of this same truth, see the next page. The Looking Glass by King Vidor, producer and director. The world is a looking glass and gives back to every man the reflection of his own face. William Makepeace Thackeray. I had to live a long time before I found the courage to admit to myself that we, all of us, make our own world. The realization came to me in a very simple way. Though I'm a Californian, I make frequent trips to New York, and I decided that all New York cab drivers were impatient, bad tempered, or hated their jobs. And hotel employees and railroad personnel were the same. I found them all difficult to get along with. Then one day in New York, I came upon the words from Thackeray quoted above. The very same day, when a cabbie and I were snarling at one another, this thought occurred to me. Could this whole situation be the result of my own thinking and outlook? I began to live Thackeray's idea, and as soon as it became a part of me, the result, on my next trip east, I encountered not one unpleasant taxi driver, elevator operator, or employee. Had New York changed, or had I? The answer was clear. To abandon excuses for one's own shortcomings is like journeying to a distant land where everything is new and strange. Here you can't continue to blame someone or something else for failures or difficulties. You have to assume the responsibility for them yourself. Of course, outside pressures do influence our lives, but they do not control them. To assume they do is sheer evasion, and it's so easy to say, it's not my fault. Since that day in New York, I've come to believe that this idea is the basis of all human relationships. It doesn't matter whether it's your neighbors, your mother in law, or the people of a foreign nation, the quickest way to correct the other fellow's attitude is to correct your own. Try it. It works. And it adds immeasurably to the fun of meeting people and being alive. Alright, next one. Find the Key Word by Margaret Blair Johnstone, minister of the Union Congregational Church, Groton and West Groton, Massachusetts. Give us courage and gaiety and the quiet mind. Robert Louis Stevenson. We were in no mood for games when we walked into the classroom at the divinity school. But here we found this line from Stevenson's famous family prayer copied on the blackboard, and over it was written, "Find the key word." As student ministers in charge of churches, most of us had been burning the candle at both ends, cramming for comprehensive exams which would determine whether our 7 years professional training was a total waste. What a time to preach, even about courage, one man said. Quiet mind, muttered another. Mine's quiet all night. The trouble is, it's paralyzed. The door opened and in came the professor. Good morning, he said. and he surveyed our gloomy ranks. Evidently spotting the glummest, he said, "And how are you this fine morning, Miss Blair?" "Who, me?" I suddenly came to. "Why, I'm fine." "You are? Well, then why don't you notify your face?" We all stopped. When we all stopped laughing, we knew the key word. Generated by gaiety, we found both courage and calm to take us through the hours we had dreaded. Ever since, in the moments of crisis, I found it helps to remember the key word. Editor's note: for the complete family prayer, see page 184. Don't Sneer at Nonsense by Jimmy Durante. A little nonsense now and then is relished by the wisest men. The other night, after a very tough day at the studio, this Jimmy Durante, comedian. I don't know if I said comedian. The other night, after a very tough day at the studio, I try to get out of a dinner date. I say I'm too tired and grumpy to be good company, but the people insist I've got to show up anyway, since the lamb chops are already in the skillet. So I finally gave in. No sooner do I get to the door when my host says, "Jimmy, dinner's not quite ready, and little Claire has been waiting for you to read to her before she goes to sleep." That's just what I need. I'm in the mood. I'm in. I'm supposed to go through a bedtime story session with a 4-year-old, but I am trapped. So I go upstairs and take the book the kid gives me and I start to read to her. I soon get quite a surprise. It's been a long time since I read the wonderful nonsense about the walrus that cries as he carves the oysters, the elephant that plays the fife, the pobble who has no toes, the owl and the pussycat which went to sea in a beautiful pea green boat. I'm soon getting a big kick out of it, as big a kick out of it as the little girl. When I come downstairs, I'm all covered with smiles and ready to leap into those lamb chops. And it gets me to thinking, too, which is a feat in itself, folks. I think, "Jimmy, nonsense is your stock in trade, but maybe you don't realize how healthy it is off the job. Maybe there's nobody who is smart and wise enough to do without a little nonsense. Maybe it's even more important than ever these days, when the headlines are not the happiest, which I've ever read, to have a sort of safety valve. When we were all kids, we grew up with nonsense as a sort of friend, and I figure the guy who says to himself, 'I've outgrown that sort of stuff,' must be a pretty lonely guy." Nothing is Wasted by A.P. Herbert, noted British humorist. Nothing is wasted. That's a quote by E.V. Lucas. That fine fellow, friend and writer E.V. Lucas, gave me the above saying. If I complained about that Punch that had rejected the funniest article that the mortal man had written, he would say, "You'll use it somewhere, someday. Nothing is wasted." Sure enough, very often those thoughts I was so fond of did emerge much later in a novel, play, or speech, and I was glad that they had not appeared before. In 1935, I went mad and into the House of Commons, interrupting, suspending, for 14 years what looked like a promising career as a novelist. E.V. Lucas, then my publisher, disapproved, but he still said, "It's all right, nothing is wasted." I did not trespass into Parliament with any personal aim. If anyone does what he sincerely feels to be a public service, nothing is wasted, is evidently right. But there is more. I did fall behind in the professional race. Other men went on writing books while I was preparing, making, or listening to speeches, drafting amendments, or simply sitting in the smoking room of the House of Commons. Yet, in those 14 years, I learned so much about men and affairs that, even in the material account, I feel all time was not wasted. I should say some, not all, of my 9 years in uniform. But this, you say, is just egotistical stuff of a writer to whom all experience is copy. No, it applies to you. After all, it is only another form of "cast your bread upon the waters," as you sit by the sickbed, or wearily attend committees, or teach the young to add, or mow the lawn, or wash the dishes, or do crossword puzzles, or do any of 1,000 things that keep you or to your friends a waste of time. Say to yourself, nothing is wasted, and be comforted. To you, others may be given at any moment some new glimpse or understanding of life, perhaps some new material wealth. The next time you shave or go into that dismal committee, you may think of something that will save the world. Your dutiful letters to your aunt may someday be preserved in the British Museum. The author of those little articles in the London Times about Mrs. Miniver never guessed they would be made into a famous film. Go on with your laughable hobbies, your dull duties, and your unknown kindnesses, and say now and then, nothing is wasted. The doctrine helps the conscience too. I have just lost money at the races, and I'm muttering sadly, nothing is wasted. I hope it is true. Okay, third set of stories for when you're down. When you're down. Failure Isn't Fatal by the Reverend James Keller, M.M., founder and director of the Christopher's author of You Can Change the World. Never despair, but if you do, work on in despair. Quote by Edmund Burke. Too often, it seems to me, people lose their courage in facing life because past failures or fear that they may fail in the future. One good way to cure such fears is to remember the story of a man who actually built a lifetime of accomplishments out of defeats. The following litany of failures that punctuated his life throughout 30 years is a living and eloquent example of the successful use of defeat in achieving victory. Abraham Lincoln's record is as follows: lost job, 1832; defeated for legislator, 1832; failed in business, 1833; elected to legislature, 1834; sweetheart died, 1835; had nervous breakdown, 1836; defeated for speaker, 1838; defeated for nomination for Congress, 1843; elected to Congress, 1846; lost renomination, 1848; rejected for land officer, 1849; defeated for Senate, 1854; defeated for nomination for vice president, 1856; again defeated for Senate, 1858; elected president, 1860. Lincoln's deep conviction that God had given him a mission to fulfill accounted in no small way for his deep humility and ability to push on in the face of difficulties and failures that would have discouraged most people. His abiding faith was well summed up in this comment which he made after becoming president. God selects his own instruments, and sometimes they are queer ones. For instance, he chose me to steer the ship through a great crisis. You too, in God's providence, can be an instrument in bringing his love, truth, and peace to a world in urgent need of it. And with Abraham Lincoln, you too can learn to say, with God's help, I shall not fail. Meet Trouble as a Friend by Isabel Layton, editor of The Aspirin Age. Trouble makes us one with every human being in the world. Quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes. Little more than 20 years ago, I spent a treasured afternoon with Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes at his Beverly Farms, just north of Boston. Lingering on the threshold as I took my leave, I asked if I might publish some of the typically rugged, earthy observations he had made during our tea together. With a firmness that belied the gentle smile dancing at the corners of his mouth, he replied, "In my more than 90 years, I've never allowed myself to be quoted, nor will I revise my pattern at this late date. But write your interview, child, and if, after 20 years from my going, anything I still said seems to serve a useful purpose, it is yours to do with as you wish." During those hours, 2 decades ago, we spoke of many things: the granite on which he built his home and his life, the barberry bushes he never tired of seeing from his windows, the mystery stories he devoured, and finally more dismal matters. Was he not deeply concerned, I asked, over the depression, threats of war, and lack of security in the world? He shook his head indulgently. Oh, you young people, you think you've discovered trouble. If you want to live without trouble, you'll have to die young. For if one thing's true, it is that it's always been with us and always will be. Terrifying, you think? Rubbish, he chuckled. It's never fazed me. Been almost grateful for it at times. Makes us one with every human being in the world. And unless we touch others, we're out of touch with life. You might as well be dead and stop growing, and if you're unwilling to feel, yes, feel deeply, you're only half alive. If I had a formula for bypassing trouble, I wouldn't pass it around. Wouldn't be doing anybody a favor. Trouble creates a capacity to handle it. I don't say embrace trouble. That's as bad as treating it as an enemy. But I do say meet it as a friend, for you'll see a lot of it, and it better be on speaking terms with it. No, trouble isn't the scourge of the world. The world has its ups and downs, so have people, and all the speechifying that breath can produce won't change things or make the millennium come an hour sooner. You can't run away from trouble. He smiled, now more benignly. Accept it. Don't worry about it. Have faith and do the needful. Okay. How to Be Mature by Dr. Hyman Judah Schachtel. 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 Author of The Real Enjoyment of Life. When It's Dark Enough, Men See the Stars by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson's words are echoed by an old Oriental proverb which goes like this: all sunshine makes a desert. What these sayings express is not an excuse, not a covering up for the tragic side of life. Rather, I think they speak the truth and give us strength. I think that they go deep into the understanding of the real nature of our lives. Mature people are made not out of good times, but out of bad times. Man's extremity is God's opportunity. It is in crisis that the best in us comes to the fore. This very age in which we live, which is so turbulent, so confusing, so uncertain, is an anvil upon which God can remake us for the good, for the better. It is in the encircling gloom that we come to realize the importance of being led by the kindly light of the Eternal One. As Emerson says, it is in the night that we can see stars which are invisible by day. What I'm asking for is mature outlook, reasonable expectations, a calm and steadfast mind, and the patience with which to meet whatever comes with the courage and faith in God, instead of with bitterness and resentment. God's Open Door by Dr. A.J. Cronin, author of The Citadel, A Thing of Beauty. God shuts one door. If God shuts one door, he opens another. That's an Irish proverb. 30 years ago, when I was a doctor in London, on the point of moving to a specialist practice in Harley Street, my health broke down. I was told that I must take a year's rest. Even so, I might never again be fit to stand the wear and tear of medical life. What a blow! I liked my work. From the humblest beginnings in a small Welsh mining practice, I had slaved to achieve this objective. And now, on the threshold of success, the door was slammed in my face. My state of mind was such that I could not help voicing bitterness and resentment to my friends. One of those was an old Irish nun, the Reverend Mother of the Ben Secours, a small order of nursing sisters who occupied a house quite near mine in Westbourne Grove, who frequently looked after my patients. She heard my outburst in silence, then said, "You know, doctor, we have a saying in Ireland. that if God shuts one door, he opens another. I did not give her remark in a second thought, and soon after left for my place of exile, a remote district in the West Highlands. Here, time hung heavy upon my hands. Suddenly, out of the blue, I had an impulse to write. I began a novel, Hatter's Castle, and I finished it, packed it up, and sent it to a publisher, who accepted it. Out of all reason, a door had opened. A new career lay before me. So many of us, meeting with sudden disappointment, misfortune, or defeat, raise a cry of anger and resentment against heaven. Why should God do this to us? To be deprived of health, miss the chance of promotion, to lose one's job. These things are hard to bear, and harder perhaps to understand. Yet we cannot measure divine providence by the yardstick of human mentality. What we think an evil may well be for eventual good. The demands of life, the, the demands life makes may seem hard at times, yet we ought not to whine. God never takes without giving something in return. Disappointments and troubles are often the instruments with which He fashions us for better things to come. Life is no straight and easy corridor along which we travel free and unhampered, but a maze of passages through which we must seek our way, now lost and confused, now checked in a blind alley. But always, if we have faith, God will open a door for us, not perhaps one that we ourselves would ever have thought of, but one that will ultimately prove good for us. For Lazy People Only by Frederick Lewis Allen, editor and author. Thank God every morning when you get up that you have something to do that day which must be done, whether you like it or not, by Charles Kingsley. There is a legend at Harvard to the effect that the late LeBaron Russell Briggs, long the beloved dean of the college, once asked a student why he failed to complete an assignment. "I wasn't feeling very well, sir," said the student. "Mr. Smith," said the dean, "I think that in time you may perhaps find that the most of the work of the world is done by people who aren't feeling very well." I have often thought of this remark and wondered whether Dean Briggs, a man of none too robust health, may not have been feeling a little seedy himself when he uttered it. Whether he may not have dragged himself to the office that morning only because he puts his responsibilities ahead of his comforts. The dean knew, I am sure, that there are such things as incapacitating illnesses, and that there is such a thing as sensibly prudent attitude toward one's health. But he also knew that the symptoms of fatigue and of laziness are practically identical, that it is hard to tell the difference between not feeling well and not feeling like doing a hard job, and also that the wise man who has an assignment to complete by Friday has done so much of it on Tuesday and Wednesday that a headache on Thursday won't matter much. He knew the difference between the fellow who plans the jobs he has to do and fits his pleasures into the chinks between them, and the fellow who plans his pleasures and then begins to think of his responsibilities. Again and again, Dean Briggs's remark comes back to me on those dismal mornings when it seems outrageous that anybody should have to settle down to work at 9 o'clock. And I start laughing at myself, and presently I feel more like buckling down and doing the thing that has to be done. Okay, we'll do one or maybe two more. Grandma Moses' Medicine by Gerald W. Johnson, author of This American People. Then Anna was born, so I had 4 babies to care for. But we got along very nice till the children got the scarlet fever. That was a hard year, but it passed on like all the rest. Grandma Moses and My Life's History. These 2 sentences constitute Grandma Moses' complete and unabridged account of one of her 92 years. Its brevity, I believe, goes far to explain why Grandma has lived into her 10th decade. She is not inarticulate. She can describe in loving and minute detail, after 60 years, her wedding dress, a Thanksgiving dinner, a practical joke she and another girl played. But about a hard year, she found nothing worth remembering except that it passed on like all the rest. Nobody can explain genius. So exactly what it is that makes Grandma Moses a significant painter, no man can tell. But if you want to know why she has remained alert, vigorous, radiantly alive into her 90s, mull over the above bit of philosophy. Beauty, love, laughter, and delight are imperishable memories. But all that is important about hardship is that it passes. How right she is. If we could only remember this truth in the hard years, how many spiritual scars and deformities we should escape, and how much more abundant would life be in the years that are given to us. Alright, we're at an hour. We're on page 57. So that's going to wrap up beginning of reading Words to Live By. It's my great grandma's book from 1980. Nice little snippets of stories. So, till next time, peace.